Welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM The Word. I'm Roberta Foster, and today I welcome Debbie Barr to Author's Corner. She has written the book Overwhelmed, How to Stop Trying to Do It All, which is published by Aspire Press, and she'll tell you more about how to find the book at the end of the program. A little bit about Debbie. She is an author and speaker with a passion for encouraging people to engage deeply with God as they journey through tough times. She's a Master Certified Health Education Specialist with degrees in journalism and health education, and she lives in North Carolina. Debbie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you.
Well, the book Overwhelmed, and oftentimes I like to start with the very basics and see if you can give us a definition. Well, I know you can, but if you will give us a definition of what does it mean to be overwhelmed, and what would somebody probably be feeling if they are?
Well, to me, the way I would explain overwhelmed is that you have so much on your plate that you have no idea how you're going to get it all done. You're feeling overburdened, or maybe feeling like you are driven by your to-do list. You are forced by circumstances and obligations to respond to what's urgent rather than doing the things you would really want to do, the things that really matter the most to you.
Well, at the beginning of your book, you gave an example that woman had to be overwhelmed with all that was going on in her life. Breakdowns, kids, job, husband, so many different activities but yet most of those are pretty normal to a family. And so how do we keep from getting overwhelmed when those type of things are kind of on the normal list?
Well, there are some of those things. I know the example you're talking about. I want you to know it's totally fictional. But most of the time, it's kind of like we have enough bandwidth to keep all our plates spinning. But when things happen all at once, like in that fictional example, when everything goes wrong at the same moment and you just don't have enough bandwidth to address it all, that's when we're really overwhelmed. And then the reality is, in the day and time in which we live, that just happens to us sometimes. And I do have some tips in the book for what I would call first aid to help rescue yourself in the moment if you have the presence of mind to think of those things. But if you can take a step back, which is really what I try to encourage the reader to do, take a step back and think about your priorities. Think about your God-given personality, your inborn strengths, your spiritual gifts, the things that you really want to do. Those are all clues to your purpose. Ephesians 2:10, where it says we're God's handiwork, created in Christ to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. The problem is when we're overwhelmed, we can miss, and we're chronically overwhelmed. We're all sometimes overwhelmed, but sometimes we're so busy, we're so committed, we're just so stretched thin that we miss what Ephesians 2:10 is talking about. We miss what we were created to do. We miss our true purpose. And so a lot of the book is focused on that long view of getting in touch with who you are and what you're really wired to do. Because doesn't it just make sense that God would gift us in ways that match up with His plan for our life?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very definitely. But not necessarily something that we put two and two together until somebody tells us that.
Right, or unless we stop and push the pause button and sit down and listen to our hearts, listen to God, and really it can come into focus that way. And part of it is our culture. which is just bombarding us with too much of too many things. And then part of it is us, not knowing what our priorities are, not being able to say no. Sometimes we just get ourselves backed into a corner because we've said yes to so many things that we really should have said no to.
Yeah. Well, you also talk about that being overwhelmed, it affects us mentally, physically, and emotionally. Well, I can already tell you how it affects you emotionally without having read the book, because you just start this breakdown process. But how about mentally and physically? Is that sense of being overwhelmed affect us in those ways that we can see and tell?
Yeah, I think if it's a temporary overwhelming situation, we recover pretty quickly.
Okay.
But if it's chronic, you've got too much stuff to take care of, you've got too much going on at work, you've got, too much information hitting you through emails and text messages and voicemail and social media. You've got too much to respond to. Sometimes all that just saps our creativity. It leaves us exhausted. It makes us feel unhappy, unfulfilled. And a lot of times we don't even pay attention to the clues our bodies and our emotions are giving us. For example, why do I feel so irritable? Why am I overreacting to this very small problem? I forgot to charge my cell phone, so what? Or, why am I overeating?
Yeah.
Why do I feel compelled to overeat? Or why can't I sleep through the night? Or why am I having these crying jags? Sometimes, our inner self is just crying out like, hey, pay attention.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get your attention to, you're too stressed, you're too overwhelmed. And so I would say, just as you alluded to, like, I kind of know when I'm getting overwhelmed, and it sounds like you do too, but it's often something we ignore just to keep going.
Well, we're going to talk more about being overwhelmed and what we can do to help that situation in just a moment. I'm talking with Debbie Barr about her book, Overwhelmed, How to Stop Trying to Do It All. It's published by Aspire Press, and you're listening to Author's Corner, and I'm Roberta Foster. Before we get to some of the tips, I found it interesting when I read in your book that you say our brains are wired to focus on one task at a time. And so I wanted a little deeper definition of that, because as a broadcaster, for me to do something, and I'm going back about 30 years ago when not everything was on a computer. So I started to do something, and I had to do something with my left hand, read something, talk, and do something with my right hand. Now, to me, that's multitasking, but at the same time, it's one task, broadcasting, with many steps. So tell me how that works when the brain likes to focus on one task at a time.
So multitasking is actually a myth. And the reason it's a myth is that the human brain doesn't have the architecture to do more than one thing at a time. But, walk and chew gum, yes, most of us can handle that. Or, maybe pedal along on our bicycle and sing a song, something like that. But what we don't realize is we're not actually multitasking. When we multitask, we think we're getting more done faster, which is why we do it. But what we're actually doing is called task switching.
Okay.
Meaning you're doing a task and you need to do this other thing. So what you actually quickly do is switch from one task to another. But what people are starting to understand and realize is that multitasking doesn't make things go faster. No. It actually adds time, because your brain has to stop one thing, pivot, bring the new task to mind, and then bring to mind all the things that you need to, work on that task. And then we stop doing that, and we do the same thing over again.
Yeah.
So it's really inefficient, and the other problem with it is that almost always information gets dropped. So it's not only adding time, it's adding mistakes. And so what the current thinking is what we're really designed to do. You know, we're not computers that can run multiple apps at the same time. We're just not. So monotasking or single tasking is actually far more productive. And that's what, you know, even in the business world, multitasking is falling out of favor because it really is not very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I can totally agree with that. I've came to that conclusion a few times myself. Okay, so now let's get to the point where you're going to give us a tip or two on what to do if we feel overwhelmed or how to prevent ourselves from being overwhelmed.
Well, I do have some tips in the book for kind of like a first aid kind of thing. It's like, you know, everything is happening all at once and you just can't hardly even get your ducks in a row. Sometimes a quick first aid rescue, you know, life preserver for that is simply physically move away from whatever that discussion or that problem or those chaotic, you know, children all around you or whatever's happening. Try to physically move away, even for a few minutes. If you can go outside, take a deep breath, walk for a few minutes if you can, or if you can't, you know, if it's in the middle of a blizzard and you're having a very serious conversation with a coworker or something, just taking a break and just going to a different physical indoor space can just give you a little bit of a reboot so that your emotions are not in control.
Okay.
That's one thing. Another thing is just to breathe differently for a few minutes because this actually stimulates the vagus nerve and it helps your heart slow down, your blood pressure get a little lower, helps you feel more calm. And what it is, you just breathe in very slowly and let your belly expand, and then exhale twice as long as you inhaled. In other words, if you inhaled for 4 counts, exhale for 8.
Okay.
And do that several times, and just physically, your body will become more calm, and that can help. Okay. Things like that.
All right. Well, today I am talking with Debbie Barr about her book, Overwhelmed, How to Stop Trying to Do It All. And so, Debbie, tell our listeners how they can find out more about this book, and then give them an overview of some of the other books that you've done recently.
Okay. This book, and really that I've done like kind of right in a row with this one, there's 4 kind of coupled by the same publisher, about the same size book. My website is really the best place to see all of those, plus books I've written in the past. Everything is right there, and that is just Debbie Barr, BARR.com. And there are links there where you can go right to Amazon or right to wherever you buy books, and you can find out more about each book, you know, kind of what I've written about it or comments that have come into me about it. DebbieBarr.com is probably the cliff notes on how to get to some more information.
Fantastic. So one more time, the book today is Overwhelmed, How to Stop Trying to Do It All. And I've been talking with Debbie Barr, and we certainly do thank Aspire Press for giving us a copy of the book to talk about. Debbie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to hear this interview again or share it with someone else, you can now find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Roberta Foster on the Author's Corner. Join me again next time.
Hi, I'm Sue Taylor, and I host the Faith to Live By podcast, available from the Sky High Podcast Network. Are you looking for a little spiritual pick-me-up as you begin your day? Each weekday morning, I have a short devotional thought to get you going and give you something to reflect on as you go about your day. Faith is not just something you need when you get saved. Faith is something you live by. Look up Faith to Live By with Sue Taylor wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe today.